Welcome to Legal Candy. I am your host, attorney Candice Colucci, and I'm here with my co-host today, MK. Say hello.
Hello.
MK is our content writer and producer of this amazing show. So today we are going to explore the dark corners of the popular culture and the law. So we are going to dive into the chilling case of the Slender Man Part 2. We did do a Part 1, so we'll do a little recap just in case you didn't catch us the first time, but there is another episode where we talk the beginning part of Slender Man. From the internet legend to the real life horror, we unravel the story of how an online myth led to a shocking criminal act that gripped the nation. Join us as we examine the legal and the psychological ramifications of the Slender Man stabbing and explore how a fictional character can blur the lines between fantasy and reality with devastating consequences. So stay tuned, because this is an episode you will not want to miss. As we are going to rip apart what took place legally is where we are truly at now. So to give you kind of a backstory, May 31st, 2014, two 12-year-old girls, Anissa Weiner and Morgan Geyser, lured their friend Peyton Lautner into a wooded area of a local park and stabbed her 19 times just to appease a fictional character called the Slender Man. The two girls, Anissa and Morgan, were charged with the attempted murder of their friend Peyton. They also called her Bella. Fortunately, she did survive being stabbed that many times. They left her there to die. Peyton was able to crawl herself out of the woods towards a track area, and a guy on a bicycle ended up finding her, and they were able to save her life. If one of the stab marks was just a little bit over to one of the other sides, it would have been a major artery and she would have died. So we are now unraveling. We talked about kind of the actual facts of this gruesomely, just horrific crime, which really led to these girls actually believing that the Slender Man was real. So they believe that there was this character, and it was based on a edited video of a photo. So when we're talking about the Slender Man originally, the original concept came from a competition. That was a competition that somebody actually set out to edit a photo and to put in some kind of scary figure. And he did it so well. He created this Slender Man, which is a super, super tall man who has no face, no eyes, no nose, has like long tentacles for fingers. And every time you see him, supposedly what he does is he preys on children. And the story that has gone viral on the internet back in the day, from photos that everybody just kept on recreating these photos, putting the Slender Man into other photographs, to where it went viral, and especially children started to believe that this was real, and that if the Slender Man, came to you in your nightmares, which just happens because you're obviously looking at this man and he's scary, then he would potentially kill you or your family if you didn't appease him in some way, which some people said would be to commit a murder and sacrifice somebody to the Slender Man. And that is exactly what Morgan and Anissa, two 12-year-old girls, had convinced themselves. Anissa is the one who introduced the Slender Man into this childhood world of wonder, and Morgan, who, as we later find out, is suffering from several different mental disorders that she was unaware of. One of them being schizophrenia. Was just the perfect kind of storm with the girls in order to make them very susceptible, in order to believe the Slender Man was real, and enough to actually plot for 6 months to kill their friend Peyton. They lured her out into the woods, telling her they were playing hide and go seek, and then stabbed her over and over again. So the girls end up getting charged with attempted murder. And where we left off talking about was the difference between being charged juvenile court and being charged in adult court. So because of the severity of their crime, they were charged as adults. And it took about a year for them to try to fight. They had attorneys who were trying to fight that said they should be seen as juveniles. And towards the end of the hearing, the things that the judge ended up saying, which is very difficult. So in a lot of the states are really different with how they treat juveniles and adults, as far as how they're going to determine if someone gets charged as one or the other. But one of the other things that people don't always take into account is that most of the states, if you end up being charged as a juvenile and you end up being convicted under the juvenile statute, the courts only have jurisdiction over you until you're 18. That's usually what takes place. So let's say somebody is 15 years old when they commit a crime and it's heinous in nature, but you think that they really should be charged as a juvenile. But the problem is the courts only have jurisdiction over them until they're 18. So that sometimes becomes an issue where sometimes courts are thinking maybe we should charge them as juveniles, but if we only have a couple of years left to keep them in custody, it's not going to be enough. But some states allow kind of a dual process to where you could be a juvenile and then could be seen as an adult afterwards. But what ends up happening for them is that the courts say absolutely not. So at the very end of it, you have the judge who makes the rulings who really believes. I thought this was interesting too, is one of the things that they bring up is their defense was really that they believed with all of their heart and soul that it was a kill or be killed. If they did not kill their friend Peyton, that they would be killed or their family would be killed by the Slender Man. So that was one of their defenses, on top of the fact that their defense was that they were not capable mentally to understand the severity of the crime or the consequences of their crimes. And as you watch through the interrogation process, when they're being questioned by police, it is very abundantly clear that both of these girls lack the required just any type of sympathy or empathy, any type of human reaction to the crime that they did. It's very clear that there was stuff very severely off with both of them. But the question is, what does that mean? Because I clearly am on the same page. I believe that these girls, even looking at their pictures, I'm looking at their photos now, and when you look at them, they're not just 12-year-old girls. They look even younger than that.
Yeah, they do.
They look like babies. Even when they're getting arrested and they're just like, so am I just gonna rot in jail? Like the words rot in jail.
Yeah.
Those are what children use. Like as if that's
like in
what
a
happens.
fairy tale.
That you just like become decrepit when you're sitting there. It always is a debate for people, and people constantly ask that question: should somebody be held to the same standards of somebody else when they lack the mental capacity to understand that? And I absolutely believe that it's hard to answer it as black and white always, but the way that I see it is that if they don't have the pieces to understand right from wrong, and it's non-rehabilitatable, that is the thing about mental illnesses, is that a lot of them do not have cures. You can have medication that will temporarily quiet some of the symptoms, but as far as there being an actual cure for them, there isn't. So I wish that our mental hospitals were actually supported and utilized like a criminal mental hospital, because that is what is really needed. And we were talking about last time is that people don't realize that there are states that don't have criminal mental hospitals. They may send you to a mental institution to get help, but it's not a criminal institution where they can lock you there for life most of the time. Like most states really don't have the resources to do that. And that is where somebody, in my opinion, cannot be rehabilitated needs to be, because it's not saying that we don't believe that you should maybe be sitting in a hard jail with other people who know what they've done. But if you've done it before and we can't rehabilitate you, then what's to say it's not going to happen again? But mental illness is an evolving thing. So I think the idea of continuously checking in on somebody, that's what they do. So a lot of the times, so like in a state like Florida, if someone is to be determined that they're not mentally capable to stand trial, a lot of times ends up happening is we put them in a mental institution for a period of time, usually a year, and then we check them again in a year and have a full evaluation from doctors saying, is this person now able to stand trial? And we do that usually sometimes 4 years in a row. We'll do it every single year. And then if it's turned out that he's non-restorable, you would be shocked to know that in a state like Florida, if we evaluate over and over again, even if you've committed a very severe crime, that there are times we have to open the doors and let you out. Because if it's determined you're non-restorable, we cannot restore the mental deficiencies that's in there, and there's nothing we can do, we don't have a place for you.
Wow.
Yeah. Welcome to the legal system. It's a very, very broken system. It absolutely is. It's got so many pieces of it for why we got there, but that would be for a whole nother episode. So what ends up happening with these girls is that is part of their initial analysis, is that their defense is that they lack the mental capacity, because you have to have that mental capacity in order to be held criminally liable and responsible for a crime. So that was their defense, was that coupled with defense that they should not be tried it as an adult. They should be tried as a juvenile because of all these mental deficiencies at the same time. So that was the very beginning of their legal proceedings, was for a year after they're arrested and put into custody for attempted murder. The question really is, do they have the mental capacity? And so the judge really wasn't having it all.
No.
He was not having it. And he said something that I really hadn't necessarily seen a judge say that was interesting. And it shouldn't have been really part of his analysis, but what he did say was, every day they're getting older.
Yeah,
That's
that
what he
bothered
said.
me too.
Yeah, because it's not about now can they understand and appreciate it. The question is, at the time of this crime, did they have the mental capacity in order to stand trial or in order to be charged as an adult? That's the question. So when he said they're getting older every day, I just was like,
look at they've aged now.
Yeah, he's like, look at them now.
What?
They're getting older. I'm like, well, you're not trying them today based on what they would have done today. You're trying them today based on what they did then. And so I didn't think that was necessarily the right analysis for it, but when he really came down to it, and he just felt like that they had contemplated this murder for 6 months, they had absolutely no concern in the world if she lived or died. I think that was a huge thing for the judge, was that they clearly left her there to die. And even, this is what I think probably shook him the most, and I think he was really grasping onto, was that when Peyton was on the ground dying and her friends that she trusted tells her that don't move, this way you'll bleed slower, you'll lose less blood because we're going to go get help. And then they admitted during the interview they were not going to get help at all. I think that was a huge part for the judge too, was him really saying, like, you also almost made sure this girl didn't live. Yeah. Because you're telling her not to go try to get help herself.
Stay there.
You're telling her to stay there and just bleed out and die in a very, just suffering way. And why they didn't just keep on stabbing until she was dead, thankfully they didn't. They never really explained why they stopped. And it really is sad to think that it's like they really wanted her to bleed out and suffer and not go and get help. So I think those were huge elements. Even though there was all this testimony that these girls were mentally unstable, that they had diagnosed Morgan with several different things. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder.
Delusional
disorder. And then you have Anissa, and she ends up getting diagnosed. We talked about Anissa, which is an interesting one. This was what was said, that it was stated kind of during some of the proceedings, especially the ones later on where she's trying to be released, is that Anissa's broken mind caused her to lose touch with reality. Anissa was under the command and control of a delusional disorder. And then I think one of the diagnoses was schizotypy, that she had kind of, pieces of, I think when you're using the delusional, I mean, at this point in time, when it comes to the psychological disorders, it's kind of gotten very, very kind of, it's saying broad is a really weird word because it's not so much broad as much as specific, but it's broad for the fact that every single thing that almost happens to a human being, it can be considered a disorder in some form or fashion. So there's so many just developments of different versions of it and spectrums of it. But when you watch the interviews with these girls, it is breathtaking to listen and hear how dangerous a disorder can be on a child that goes unchecked, unmanaged, and when you let them off into the real world with access to just your kitchen, right? So they just go into the kitchen, they grab a knife and go, hey, let's kill our own friend. Let's kill our friend and let's just make sure that she doesn't live. And then we're just going to walk off and go live our life with the Slender Man and never come back to our parents. That was their actual plan. And these girls believed that in their mind. And you want to think, oh, that sounds so crazy. But I remember Bloody Mary. I vividly remember when you first learned about the story about Bloody Mary. And I went to a summer camp and we had talked about it all summer long. We were like, we're going to do Bloody Mary. We're going to do Bloody Mary, right? So you had to, I think if I remember right, you had to turn off all the lights and then you said Bloody Mary 5 times. And then when you opened your eyes, she would be in the mirror. And so at our summer camp, we had a big, girls' bathroom. We had this big mirror. And I remember we literally talked about it all summer, and we kept on changing the date of when we were going to do it. We were like, we're going to do it on Friday. And then people were chickening out, and we were just like, and I remember people were just like, you can't believe you're going to do this to us. I mean, like the bullying tactic of like, I'm like, you got to be with this. And I remember I was so scared, and I remember like, and I was like, I wanted to chicken out, and I was like, well, no, I've already taken this pack to do this thing with him. And I remember like it was yesterday going into the bathroom when we finally decided to do this. I know my summer camp, who does know me, is probably like, oh my gosh. We go in there, and I remember even like, there was no research anything online back there, but we knew what the stories were, that she was supposed to come and then she would haunt you, and there was no benefit to even doing it. There was something you weren't going to get anything out of it. It was like, it was really just to see who was going to be chicken and not do it. So we all got together, and there's probably like 6 of us. We get in the bathroom, and we get to 4. Right? And I'm like, I've got tears in my eyes. I'm just like, oh my gosh. And I remember one girl's like, was like already crying. We're all holding hands, and we get to 4 and then just scream and run out of the bathroom. We get in trouble. We scream and run out of the bathroom. And I remember our guidance, or one of the counselors came up and he's like, what are you guys doing? And we were like, nothing. And she's like, 3 of us are like crying. And I remember thinking about it for years. I could not go by a mirror at night. I mean, I was like, because it was like, she was supposed to come back for you in a mirror. And I remember thinking, this was the dumbest thing I've ever been a part of. And we didn't even get to 5. So we had convinced ourselves that we were saved. It wasn't going to happen to us. But that to be said of, in a form, this was their Bloody Mary. Every generation has their something. And Slender Man is this generation's ghost story, horror story of what you have to do. And luckily, the Bloody Mary story, the one that we knew that had went around, was not that you had to hurt anybody or murder anybody, but there was something we had to do. We all had to be together. We all had to say it 5 times. We all talked to each other. We all convinced each other to do it. And so it's sad that the concept behind it, something that becomes viral, that is easy to manipulate people to do, has just kind of spiraled out of control into something like this, where they believe that the Slender Man is... I mean, I can tell you 100% I had nightmares about it. Yeah. I had nightmares about Bloody Mary. There was a scary movie that came out of a Bloody Mary. I couldn't watch the scary movie. Like, it messed me up for like a while in my head, thinking like, I cannot believe I engaged in this. And I kept on telling myself, I remember at nights I would like not want to look in the mirror, and I'd be like, you never got to 5. You never got to 5. It's not coming for you. She's not coming for you. That's how easy it is for something as like that. But take 2 girls that have mental deficiencies and add a ghost story that says, once you've engaged the Slender Man, once you've seen him, once you've become acquainted with him, if you don't sacrifice something to him, you will be murdered or your family be murdered. And to start hearing that over and over again and believing it. And that's
seeing
exactly
it on
what
the
happened.
internet,
And seeing
on a
it.
website, and drawings, and like thousands of other kids believing it too. So like you said, it becomes like that viral meme.
And the answer is, I mean, the question really is what is the actual answer for situations like this? And I know that like when my son was little, it was a lot of looking through everything he read and saw, and going through his cookies on his phone and his cookies on his computer. And it's like, I felt like as long as I could see everything he was seeing, I had an idea what's happening. I was going through notebooks, anything he may have jotted on, anything he may have written on. My mother was the same way. She got me a diary. Okay, mind you. She got me a diary, and I remember
They all do.
They all do, right?
Right.
She gets me a diary, and I remember she's like, and there's a key. It wasn't years later that I realized those diaries come with 2 keys. 2 keys, yet I only got 1. And so my greatest secrets that I used to put in this diary that my mother found out was the very first lesson of don't ever put anything in writing you don't want the world to see. And since those moments of me being in like middle school or elementary school, I never did it again. You will not find anything in writing that Candace has written that I wouldn't let be on a billboard somewhere. And all thanks to my mother. But you've got to be watching every single thing that they do. You have to be going through all of their stuff. It's why you hear those kids that are like, my privacy, that means nothing. Right. Don't listen to your kids. They're talking about privacy. Tell them if they want privacy, they can emancipate themselves. Okay, they can call our office. We'll explain to them that's not a good idea. But they can emancipate themselves.
And they can get off the internet.
And they can pay all of their own bills and live by themselves. And at that point in time, then they can have their privacy. But until then, our jobs as parents is to look at every single thing. Their text messages, their Instagrams, their Facebook. But none of those things should be private. This is my opinion. I believe it's a concept of your imagination about this word privacy. And I've heard parents say, your child should have privacy. I'm just like, what? Privacy is the place where delusions begin, right? We want to step into those things into a child. Like, if your child, why you should have these conversations with your kids sometimes, if you saw something like that, if you saw a drawing of a Slender Man and you're like, what is that? Ask them, what is that? Let's talk about it. Tell me what you think it is. And let me explain to you why this isn't real. Right. Sometimes it's just so they get another perspective of like, well, yeah, the internet's saying this, my mom does say this. So, at least they have two different opinions than the ones that they're finding on the internet that are always going to be self-serving. They're not researching the people who don't believe in Slender Man. They're researching the people who believe in them. It is a confirmation bias that children are doing. And so the only thing that we really can do is insert ourselves into their life in as many aspects as we can. And I think that is the one thing about social media that is beneficial, is that there are so many apps that allow you to do that. There's so many apps. We had apps that cloned my child's phone that can show me when he got a text message. We copied everything onto an iPad. I mean, my son's going, listen, now I know it all. Now I figured it all out. But I tried to get involved with every single thing that I could. I was involved with his friends at school. I was at his school. And that was an idea just to make sure that I could at least to some degree have a pulse on everything, because there is no 100% cure and end all be all to stopping these kind of behaviors with children. But you can at least try to infiltrate them to at least get an idea of what's happening with your kids. And even then, you can't be guaranteed, but you at least could potentially lessen the odds of some of those things. Like we were talking, is that these poor parents, all of them. I mean, honestly, I think with Anissa, a lot of the stuff with Anissa had to do with her bullying background. There's only so much you can do as a parent for the bullying. It is just atrocious with what it does to a child's mind. But I think that's what created a lot of her mental instabilities. But with Morgan, she was born this way. She was born with schizophrenia. God. And by all accounts, her parents really felt like they didn't see it. But we did say that there were things in her bedroom that may have been questionable. And those are things that maybe you find and you ask them about it and say, why would you do this? Does that answer make sense to you? And if so, then if not, then maybe you look into it some more. But my heart just really goes out to these parents who are trying to do everything they can by their children, yet they still sometimes end up like this. So what ends up taking place with what this judge is saying is the judge goes, listen, I think it's got way too many aspects of the fact that this was deliberate, this was intentional, and he doesn't believe that this crime should be seen under a juvenile lens. It should be seen as an adult lens. And I think that the hard part really came down to, and this is really where it is that they were, by the time he's answering these questions, they're 13, right? So that means they've got 5 more years under jurisdiction as a juvenile. So I think as a judge, that becomes the hard part of, maybe I do believe that they're a juvenile and it should be given weight that they're a juvenile, but I don't think 5 years is enough time for us to make a difference in these children's lives with the severity of what they did. So I think that that's probably what pushed him more into the adult world of it. So they have already gotten charged as adults and they get kept in the adult courts. They do not move down to juvenile court. And then what happens is that this is when you kind of see where they finally do, because it seemed like they also determined that they're mentally stable to stand trial. Like they planned on having them go forward. And I think once it gets into adult court and they start really looking at it again, they end up analyzing the entire thing. So in December of 2017, Anissa is committed to 25 years at a mental health institution. She is required, this is part of her sentencing, she's required to spend at least 3 years in the institution before seeking release on community supervision, and her supervision will last until she is 37 years old. So Anissa is the one who ends up being that she isn't the one who does all of the stabbing, but she's very much the one whose idea was it. She pushes the idea. She really puts a lot of pressure on Morgan when Morgan's really questioning it, and she seems to not have she doesn't have as severe as mental deficiencies as Morgan does. But it definitely looks like when the time comes to actually do the actual stabbing, it is Morgan who just goes to town. Morgan stabs over and over again. And then in her interview afterwards, Morgan is completely without emotion. And it shows that she just lacks the required mental capacity to understand the consequences of it in a way that's not. And that's the thing about a lot of these disorders, especially the schizophrenia, is like her father, because what you find out is that Morgan's father was a high-functioning schizophrenic. It was remarkable what he was saying, is that he says, because they're very brilliant people most of the time, and a lot of times they're so brilliant to where they know that something isn't real, is what he was saying, is that I know something isn't real, but I also know it's there. So that was the example that he gave, which was like, I mean, I had chills up my spine is when he said, as he goes, like, I know that the devil is not in my back seat, but the devil is in my back seat, right? That's because he can literally look back and see that there is something that looks like a devil, but he knows, because he has the mental maturity, that there's no way that there's actually a devil in the back seat. Right. Not all schizophrenic people have that ability to process that, especially when you're a child, right? And so that's the unfortunate thing about being a child and it being undiagnosed. And so based on that, Morgan is committed to 40 years of a mental health treatment and monitoring, and also she's ordered to remain in the mental health institute, and also has the requirement of the 3 years that she has to be in custody before she can seek actual release. And so they both pled guilty, but were actually found to be not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. So both of them ended up being technically, it's a very quasi kind of, the way that it works is that they pled guilty, but the actual sentence that gets entered afterwards is that they're not guilty because of their mental defect, but here is the actual sentencing based on that. So they're not they have to serve the time based on their plea agreement. That's what they agreed to as a plea agreement, but they're technically, both of them are found not guilty. So
is that to avoid criminal charges? Like,
no, because they do have criminal charges,
right? But prison, like after they turned 18, like, is that to avoid that plea with that?
What it is that I honestly, what the real reason is that I believe if they had been found actually guilty of these crimes, Anissa is a little, I'll separate the two, because I think Anissa's mental defects are a lot more minor than Morgan. But giving you Morgan for an example, if they had found her guilty and held her completely liable for these crimes, I think it would have been easily to be appealable. It was very, very obvious, given the fact of her mental deficiencies that she's been diagnosed with, and coupled with her interview, that this girl is lacking the mental requirement to understand that there is something very missing. And same with Anissa, I think both of them. So at the end of the day, what ends up happening is, and it happens a lot, is that you'll enter a plea agreement that says, I'm going to plead to this, but at the end of the day, the court's going to find me not guilty, and I'm going to take the sentencing that the court ends up either agreeing to or the court ends up imposing. So at the end of the day, they have now an agreement and have taken that sentence, but under the guise of the fact that they're considered not guilty. So it's very much a very interesting kind of resolution, but it fits the facts of this case, which I think it ended up being kind of a roundabout way to get to it. I think at the very beginning, it probably just should have been, we're charging you as an adult, but we're going to find you not guilty by reason of insanity. We want to talk about now what that sentencing looks like. And I think that's kind of what ended up happening there. I think everyone was on the same page that there was obviously something very missing. And the judge who did the juvenile obviously has his own opinion about what he believes that they shouldn't have been charged as a juvenile. But the adult charge at least allowed them to have jurisdiction over these girls till way after. So what ends up happening, and which I think is just interesting now, is because I remember these girls years ago. I remember when they were little, but I hadn't really researched what has taken place to them now. And so it was very interesting to learn that in 2021 is when Anissa was released. So she gets released because of the fact that they analyze and they say, listen, she's been seeking treatment. She's gone through all of these, like, they'll bring in all the doctors that she's been seeing. They'll have her evaluated by doctors who are seeing it. Her attorney can get new doctors to evaluate her. The state's attorneys can get doctors to evaluate her. And they do, it's just like a parole hearing. It's a hearing to see, do we think that she has been rehabilitated to to a degree upon which she should be released. And the reason why it makes more sense with Anissa is because when we're talking about Anissa's diagnosis was more of this delusional disorder by proxy. She's by somebody else. I think a lot of the deficiencies of what took place with her bullying wise made her more susceptible to it. But she has a bunch of pieces which probably through maturity of you getting older and therapy, she could be rehabilitated to a way. If I was the mother of Peyton, I would believe that neither one of them should ever be out free. It is hard for me to think that you could do something like that and walk away from my daughter, but also the way Anissa is the one who said to her, don't get up, lay there, we're gonna get help. Like you were trapping my daughter, who luckily she didn't believe that and she kept on going for help. Other than that, she may have listened and stayed there. And I think had she not been in shock, because we found out that Peyton was in shock and she couldn't feel the pain, had she not been in shock, she may have just laid there, you know? So to me, those pieces are not just as Peyton's mom, but as a mother in society. I think that those pieces are enough to me to go, listen, I don't want you to be tortured your whole life or you be in a big boy jail, but I do think you need to be in a facility locked away from people probably for the rest of your life. But that's a hard system. It's a hard system. Our system doesn't support that kind of situation. It's hard to rehabilitate them that way. But based on those facts, that's why Anissa would get released. It's because she has less mental deficiencies, so she could show that she could be rehabilitated. And so trusting the system, they determined that they believe she had been. They released her to her father. And part of the stipulation is she is supposed to not speak to Morgan until I think it was like 2036. They are really, and she can't talk to Peyton. They're very big about co-conspirators not speaking to each other ever again while they're in custody. Even when they get out, that usually is part of their probation because they think that peer influence is very, very strong, that they're likely to reoffend if they're together again. But just recently, so literally it was of this year, which was interesting with why we were looking back around, is that Morgan had tried to get released.
It's just last month?
Yeah, just literally a month ago. So what makes this story very timely is that literally like around April 2024, Morgan, who turns 22 years old this month actually, she turns 22 years old. So we're talking 10 years that she's been sitting in there. She has been involved in this whole entire thing for 10 years, but she's been in treatment in this facility. So the whole entire time she was waiting for trial and all the other stuff, she didn't go into this facility until 2018, that she had tried to apply for release into society. And based on that evaluation at that point in time, they've said again that they did not believe, this is her second time, I think her second time attempting, is that they don't believe that she is rehabilitated to a place to where she could be released. And so they had petitioned for a conditional release of her. And what'll normally happen in situations like this where it's been a really long time, she will probably spend another, I would say something like this, probably 20, 25 years. I mean,
she can go again in 6 months.
Yeah,
though, right?
She can go, I think everything. She can continue going. I think it's like every 6 months. But I mean, I think if we could predict, I think she would probably be sitting there for another potentially 10 years. If not, it's hard to say they'll keep her there for the rest of her life. For something you did at 12 years old and as a mental institution, like I said, it's really about the fact that we don't have a system that's really set up for it. And I think we were saying that what the catch-22 is about situations like this and why it'll be hard forever to be released is that it is a catch-22 that when someone has a mental deficiency, we put them in a mental institution, that we lock them there and we put them in padded rooms and we put them windows. In so Morgan has no windows. They're not letting her go outside for whatever the reason is. But what ends up happening is they don't usually rehabilitate as much as we would have wanted them to. It goes in the opposite direction.
Right. She's got worse.
True rehabilitation needs all kinds of elements. Number one is it needs freedom, right? So you've got to have this freedom to make a choice and decisions throughout a day in order to test, are you rehabilitated or not? And so that really is the catch-22 about a mental institution, an involuntary mental institution where you're locked there and you can't leave, is that you usually don't necessarily get better, you get worse. And so that will probably be what ends up transpiring from her, from a 12-year-old little girl brain who hadn't fully developed to now being developed inside of a locked kind of shell with other potentially mentally insane people. It doesn't really breed itself very well for a rehabilitation. And I have done when I was doing criminal defense and more extensively is that I've been a part of these mental evaluations. And one of the things that I found just super interesting is people always want to know, is it easy to fake a mental disorder? And I'm telling you, it's not. It's not easy to fake it, because that is one of the very, very big analysis that these doctors, psychiatrists do, is they look for signs. They have a whole, as much as they have a list of all of the actions that show that you meet the requirements of this disorder, they have a list of all of these actions that show that you are the common fakers. They have an entire kind of evaluation for it. And I had a client, and I wouldn't even tell you the name, but I'm telling you, I had a client, and that's why I said is that you think you know fact from fiction until you do criminal defense. then you start meeting really interesting people in your life and going, oh my gosh. So we had one of my partners defending people from crimes that we believe they didn't commit, Kayla Allen, for all of these years. My girl Kayla, she will tell you, we had a client who, we believed in our soul that this guy was crazy. He had all of the pieces. We have letters and pictures and things he would send us from jail, the way he would make his phone calls to us, the things he would say. I'd go see him in custody. It was just all of the pieces. And when we had him evaluated, the doctor we hired told us he's faking. And I remember we were like, no, there's no way. There's no way. And I'm telling you, he did some really gnarly things. It was embarrassing things, very public things he would do that all just led to the fact that he had some mental disorders. And our own doctor was like, and it was I didn't even realize that was a true concept of faking these disorders and that these doctors can spot them out. Yeah, come to find out, he was faking them.
Wow.
Yeah, he was, because when it all didn't go his way, he turned into a completely different person. So, very, very good actor. But it was, I have so many, just talk about diaries of a madman. We have so many handwritten letters and notes and pictures where there were times me and Kayla would question, we were like, should we be afraid of our lives? We get these crazy letters.
Psychology major.
How are they would send out his letters to us and we get them and go, how do these come to us? And when I'm going to see him in custody, the officers, they have no care in the world for an attorney who represents these criminals. They will lock the door behind me in a room where no windows are at with the client. They're like, that's your client, that's on you. You decided to represent them, that's on you. They give you this panic button, which, mind you, doesn't work a lot of the times. You push it, it's 15 minutes later, they're like, hey, did you push that button? Nobody comes running. In the facilities, they give you a panic button. And that's if they give you one. Most of the time they put it, there's one on the wall and it's way far from where the table's at. So you have to figure out how you're going to make it to them. I think about all the crazy things I've done. And so that being said is they definitely have zero protection for you. But he would hand me things like letters and I would take them back and I would read them and I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, should we report this? And she's like, no, you're his attorney, you can't report it, we're gonna tell. I was like, well, this is kind of disturbing. Yeah, he wasn't crazy. So that being said is that there is specialists that can determine if somebody's making it up or not. And that is something also that will sometimes unravel through them being in the custody, is that they will then sometimes, and I think there was one point that I think it was said that Morgan told a therapist that she had made it all up. And that became a big kind of turning point for judges. And remember, depends on who the judge is. Like I said, his mental illnesses are so underserved. They just absolutely are. So that being said, as a judge really did put some weight on that. And I believe you can put zero weight on it, because that's another thing people will do when they're sitting in custody so long is like, well, I'm just going to say the whole thing was a lie and then they'll let me out. That's what I'll do. And there's no way, when you really look into the facts of this case with Morgan and you watch her interview at 12 years old after she was arrested, you would never question that this girl was mentally unstable. That she definitely was suffering from things at the time. So at the end of the day, she is still sitting in an institute and is getting treatment for several different things. But what I did see in the interview, and it talked a lot about the parents. And I think, luckily Peyton she's done interviews and she just says that she hasn't really watched all of the specials about her. She hadn't really watched any of the really interrogation videos, the interview videos, but she had seen a couple of them. And the interviewer had asked her is that, do you find it shocking to watch these things? And she says, yeah, I find it just, very shocking that they planned it. That they really went so far as to like plan this whole entire thing out to hurt me. But she just seemed also kind of, just very mature about it.
She said she was thankful in a way because it's propelled her to seek, a career in the medical field.
Yeah.
She's very aware.
And I think because of the shock, I honestly think when she talked about the fact she went into shock, because I remember before I saw the interview with her, I thought how traumatizing that would be for a 12-year-old. Like, how do you get over your two best friends, or one of them your best friend, the other acquaintance, but stabbing you over and over again and leaving you there to die? And I guess because of the shock factor, like her body protected her mind and her body from that pain and that mental processing of it all, because it was just remarkable how just mature she seemed about it. And then listening to the parents of Morgan and Anissa was also just really sad. It's sad to think that parents have to go through that. And I've seen some other stories, like, when we think about like Columbine and we think about the shootings, I always am very interested in the times when they do films or documentaries about those parents. And those parents speak about what it's like to have a child who does that and the guilt that they feel. And, is it something that they missed? Is it something that they could have prevented? And then what it's like going through life knowing that your child had done these things. But Morgan's mom, I think when I was watching her, I thought that at the end of the day, doing criminal defense when you deal with a lot of moms, especially when I was doing a lot of juveniles, I just think how remarkable, and we just went through Mother's Day, so how remarkable unconditional love of a mother is. And you see it the most in the criminal courts and jails. Like, if you could take the logins for a jail, it is majority going to be the mothers of the inmates who come and see them every weekend, who bring $20 in quarters because that's the only thing you can get at the vending machines there. And they come every single Saturday and see their son. And that's the only time their son can get all of the different candies from the vending machines or their daughters. It's breathtaking to watch that the love, it doesn't get diminished by their actions. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about an unconditional love of a mother, is that that's what genetically I think was always supposed to happen, was that someone has to love you through it all, and it will always be your mother. So so happy Mother's Day to, I know some come on afterwards, but to all the mothers. I have been blessed with a phenomenal mother, and I think that this story came down to a lot of mothers. We saw a lot of mothers during it, and I think it was hard for both of them. Obviously, it's unfathomable to think about your daughter missing, her to be stabbed, but then to think about the other mothers whose children are the ones who actually did it. But Morgan's mom said, that this is what I do. This is my life. I go and see her, and then when I talk to her, it's like it never happened. And then I leave and go back to my regular life after I see her. And that's just the way that it is every single day. And I think you were saying some of the questions, like she said, I ask my daughter the same questions all the time. And one of the questions I ask her is what is she going to watch on TV that night? Like, she gets to watch TV. And so she says, what did she say? She goes, it depends on.
It depends on, it's not my turn.
It's not my turn.
It's not my turn.
And she's in a room by herself.
She's in there with her imaginary.
Yeah.
She's completely regressed.
Yeah. And she's in a facility like that. They're in the right facility. That is the one thing about that is nice about the Wisconsin situation, is that that state does have the availability to have a mental institution of involuntary that can keep her there for another 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is. And it gives her, she has a room in her own space and I guess can watch TV. And that's what it should be. Should it be those jail circumstances where it's completely unlivable and it's miserable and those kind of things? I think it's more of a more livable place because of the fact that we now have taken into account that there's a mental deficiency that has caused her to commit those crimes that are not necessarily her fault, but actually is the fault of a genetic deformity. So that being said is that I think we're going to wrap up another episode of Legal Candy. If you have anything special you want to hear from us, let us know. We are barreling into hurricane season, so we're probably going to talk some more about hurricane law, what is happening with the insurance companies. They are now getting spanked. Some of the insurance companies have been held liable and responsible for not handling insurance claims properly and have been fined. So we are going to talk about that. Our heart goes out to everybody everybody involved in this story and all of the amazing mamas out there. We are just all trying to do our best, and it's hard to blame anybody for situations like this because at the end of the day, none of us ever want this to happen, and that's really all we can do as mamas is try to love them with everything we have day to day. And sometimes it just unfortunately happens to unravel this way. So that being said, join us for another episode of Legal Candy. We will see you later.